Hi Caroline, brilliant to speak to you today. So you have a new book out called Do It Like a Woman, which is a really sort of positive, life-affirming account of what women are capable of. But when I was looking into all your cuts and everything, it's a shame that there's been this, alongside this incredibly empowering message, has been all this sort of stuff on the internet that you've been involved in, campaigning, really positive campaigning, but also some darker stuff. But I wanted to start with how you feel the internet has helped you as a writer and as a woman, and how it's been a positive thing.
I think overall the internet's been amazing for women. We always focus on the negative because that's the most dramatic. And yeah, what happened to me was pretty horrific, and it was very scary getting all these rape and death threats that were very graphic and violent, telling me to shut up essentially. But I mean, it is kind of a double-edged sword, I think, because on the one hand, you do have this aspect of the internet where you get this group of angry men telling women to shut up or they're going to rape them. But on the other hand, I think it's given women permission to speak in a way that we've never had before, or I suppose in a better way of putting it would be to say it's taken away the need for permission. You can just start a blog, you can just start a Twitter account, and you can start writing about what you think. And I'd always wanted to write. But in my head, I always had this idea that there would be a guy in a suit who I would have to submit my work to, and he would not like my work, and so I just didn't really want to go down that route. And I think that's the way it is for a lot of women, that we sort of feel nervous about this man who has to give us permission, this sort of monolithic man. And I think the internet's been amazing for feminism overall. It's really given women a really powerful voice.
It's weird, isn't it? Because it's a double-edged sword, because you're absolutely right. On one hand, it's sort of taken away the red tape, hasn't it? From, as you say, submitting your work, you're able to just get on and say what you want to say, and people will appreciate that, and you can sort of move your voice forward in that way. But do you think it's changed, or do you think it's always been a double-edged sword? I mean, I don't want to get too I remember when it was jumpers for goalposts, but I do feel like there's been a kind of dramatic change. Can you remember when you started or discovered Twitter? Can you remember your first tweet, for example?
I can actually remember my first tweet. It was, I think it was an article about Naomi Wolf, because I actually came to online feminism relatively late. I came to feminism relatively late. I only sort of discovered feminism really when I was 25, and I only opened a Twitter account when I was 28. So I don't remember Twitter in the sort of halcyon days of whatever it was you said. I remember my first email address, and I remember doing my first Google search, but I wasn't really involved with social media until a few years ago. So I can't really speak to how much it's changed. Although I feel like it has, I mean, even in the past few years, it does feel like it's changed a bit. Feminism has become such a huge thing, and there are so many people involved in the conversation that it's become more, I guess, more dominant. It feels like there are more of us dictating the conversation in a way.
I suppose there's a lot to be said, isn't there, for, wherever you come from, wherever you live, even if you feel as though you're surrounded by nobody talking about feminism, which I guess definitely exists for some people, that you can put something out onto the internet and there will be an audience, all those people in a small town.
Well, that's why I joined Twitter, in fact, because I'd spent 3 years, in a university library. I didn't really know any feminists. And
what had you been studying?
English literature.
Right.
And I read that, Twitter was where the feminists were. So I thought, well, I'll join Twitter and sort of try and get involved in feminism that way, because I didn't know how else to do it.
So your interest in English literature, is that how you came to the sort of Jane Austen debacle?
Well, no, Jane Austen wasn't actually my choice. That was pure coincidence that the Bank of England chose her. The campaign was just for female representation.
So the campaign being that the Bank of England were phasing out the only female banknote, and it was just going to be men representing our currency.
Yes. Yeah. So of the historical figures that are on banknotes, so the people who are there because they represent something great about British past, something that we're really proud of and that we want to celebrate, we're all going to be men. And so obviously that was essentially saying that only men had ever done anything worth celebrating. So I thought that was an unnecessary decision. And from my work with the Women's Room, which is an organisation that I co-founded to get more female experts in the media, I've been looking into role model research and what a difference it makes to women to see women in the world around them. So because I sort of had this in my head already, this news report about yet another area where women were going to be scrubbed out of history, yet another woman that was going to be taken away as a role model, I just thought it was ridiculous and needed to be challenged. So I did, and now I can't remember why I'm talking about that.
Well, it's quite a benign request.
Yes.
It's not an aggressive request. Yeah. It's not even born from fury, is it? It's sort of saying, hey, hang on a minute, this is our national currency.
Well, to be honest, I didn't even expect to have to fight very much for it.
No, sure.
I thought it was such an obvious point that they would say, actually, yeah, fair enough, okay, well, we'll do something about this.
Because so much of feminism is the feeling that nobody's really noticed, that nobody, that somebody just needs their attention drawn.
That it just hadn't occurred to them. But for some reason, they really dug their heels in, and it became this really big thing. And yeah, I mean, the reaction that I got for it was really quite astounding when you think of it in that context of I was asking for a woman on a piece of paper. Yeah. And the reaction was this huge tidal wave of rape and death threats. And I mean, it's almost amusing in a way because, women are always called irrational and over-emotional. And I mean, really, if anyone's irrational and over-emotional, it's someone who feels the need to send a rape threat to a woman who wanted a woman on a banknote,
The problem is, I think, is that people below the line or people on Twitter aren't really representative of the wider population. So the vast majority of people, I would think, oh yeah, duh, put a woman on a banknote.
Yeah.
But the vitriol you receive is sort of disproportionate, I think, to kind of common thinking.
Yeah.
So that must have been quite shocking to have this tidal wave of awfulness.
It really was very shocking. I hadn't expected it at all. And I think most people also were quite shocked to see what was happening.
Sure.
And I think not just because of the huge overreaction that it was, but also because I think people had thought we'd sort of moved on further than perhaps we have, because you can't say this kind of stuff face to face, and you wouldn't really want to because you have to see the person's reaction. I think one of the things that, I guess the positive that I take out of the awfulness is that at least it's shone a light onto the fact that we still have work to do here, and that there are still men who probably aren't the majority of men, but they do exist, who find it very threatening to have a woman in the public sphere, which is another reason that I think focusing on female representation is really important, because clearly it's very, very threatening. And until it stops being threatening, women are going to carry on getting rape threats.
It's sort of terrified flailing a lot of the time, I think. So, for example, the hashtag, just a few days ago, we saw a hashtag, feminists are ugly, oof, knife through the heart, that one. But feminists are ugly, that hashtag was huge, and it was trending worldwide, and Twitter promoted that it was trending and they were enjoying their traffic. It seemed that way anyway. But when I actually, I'm afraid, clicked on the hashtag, it was it had a real last days of the Roman Empire fear about it. People were going kind of quite ballistic and sort of flailing about, quite panic-stricken. I mean...
The people who were saying feminists are ugly. Right, okay.
Yeah, but I think it's that sort of sense of threat and doom, I think I always pick up from those. But nonetheless, in your case, it crossed over to criminality. I mean, people made actual threats against you that were illegal. Yeah. So how was that process when that started happening? Because you put your foot down and reported it. So how was that process in reporting it? Because I think lots of women experience that.
Yeah, it wasn't a process I would willingly go through again. When it happened to me, since then Twitter have got a lot better. When I was getting threats, to report a threat to Twitter, you had to go to a different website and fill out this really long form for each tweet that you got sent. And it would have just taken me it would have taken me all the time in the day to...
Also, correct me if I'm wrong, when I've done it in the past, and this has now changed, you couldn't submit screen grabs, so if somebody had then deleted their threat, unless you had a link, you couldn't do anything about it. You had to upload links, which was fraught with problems. Yeah. So you had to fill out this ludicrous form, and then what happened?
Well... I actually didn't fill out the form because there were just too many and I didn't really know what to do. But people started realising what was happening, and they started trying to contact people at Twitter. One of whom, I've forgotten his name now. He was like a PR guy, I think, to tell him that, there's this woman who's getting all these rape threats. To which his response was to lock his account and block me personally, which was a bit weird.
Take that.
Yeah, I mean, okay, fine. I'm sorry that people have harassed you over me getting rape threats. So yeah, that was very odd. And then the police got involved, and that was also kind of farcical. Most of the police officers I dealt with didn't understand Twitter, so I was having to sort of explain what tweets were and how to search for tweets, and while also having all these threats coming against me, and it, I really wouldn't. I don't think I would report again, because it was just hugely traumatic, the whole thing. And I mean, sort of they lost evidence and wanted me to look back through evidence, and in fact, the woman who was supporting me through it, who works with Paladin, the stalking advocate organisation. She trains police officers on stalking issues, and she said it was so badly handled that she wouldn't have been able to use it as a case study because it wouldn't be believable.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a pretty bad experience of the police.
But nonetheless, in the end, you saw 2 people tried and convicted.
Yeah.
I think at that point it became unavoidable for Twitter to face the very huge problem they had on their hands. And there was that kind of leaked email from the boss of Twitter saying, we're really not doing this well enough. So in a horrible, traumatic, roundabout way, we have seen change as a result of what you went through. But when you had to go trawl back through those horrible tweets while you're training police officers as to what you'd gone through and how people were doing this, I'm quite interested in that because I get loads of this stuff as well. Nobody's threatened to rape me, but someone told me that someone was involved in a conversation I was in the other day and told the person I was having a chat with to suck a dick, to shut themselves up. And so, I mean, this is kind of relatively commonplace. And I think one of the fastest things people will say in support is, don't feed the trolls, just ignore them, which I have grave problems with because it makes it about you and how you're experiencing that sort of abuse. But I always think there's only so much aggression one person can absorb before they're thoroughly bummed out and depressed with their day. So having to read them with the best will in the world, I mean, it still hurts, right? I mean, it still ruins your lovely time.
Yeah, I mean, getting rape threats is there's no way to receive that in a happy-go-lucky way. You can't. And also, when I think even just one rape threat, you kind of have to take it seriously to a certain extent because you don't know who these people are, you don't know where they are, you don't know what they're capable of, and it only takes one person to mean it. And then when you're receiving them, minute by minute, I sort of went into this sort of siege mentality. Where I definitely wasn't thinking in a very logical way. I was just absolutely terrified because there's no time for you to sort of logically, get them through your brain. You're just constantly under attack and all you can feel is, fear.
I think in the part, I mean, I don't see how anyone can legislate for how anyone deals with this stuff. But in the past couple of weeks, we've seen Sue Perkins and Jack Monroe leave Twitter either temporarily or permanently, we don't know, because of really horrific homophobic abuse they've received, really kind of misogynistic, terrible stuff. I think Sue Perkins's crime was that somebody started a rumour that she may be in the frame to take over Jeremy Clarkson on Top Gear, which apparently was nonsense anyway. But she received this barrage of abuse and those 2 women left, which is a real loss and a real worry. But I wonder if you have ever considered modifying your behaviour, because it's a horrible kind of fight or flight thing. Do you fire blanket your expression sometimes? Obviously
I do, because some days you just think, do I want to receive abuse for this? No, actually, I'm not really in the mood to receive abuse. And you know what's going to get people going. So yeah, some days I don't feel in the right mind frame, and so I won't comment on things. I'm much more circumspect in what I say and do, and I tend to save things for something that I think really matters, or I will write, or I tend to just sort of write things in articles now rather than say things on Twitter, because then I can just put it out there. And you know, I will have then people tweet me and email me about the article, but it's sort of, I sort of feel like I've got a bigger platform to sort of write out my thoughts, properly put out my argument. So yeah, it's changed the way I interact on Twitter. What I found really interesting about Sue Perkins' experience, actually, and it's something that I think crops up again and again with these attacks, is the reason that she was sent these threats, which is that she was seen as being invading a male sphere. And I really think that is what is at the heart of it. It's all about being scared that women are invading a men's arena, which is why it's particularly bad for women in sort of video games and tech, that kind of thing. And so, you know, I think that what actually really needs to be done to deal with it, it's not going to be Twitter, it's not going to be the police, it's going to be changing the way we see men and women and changing the roles that we're expected to fulfill. And, you know, I'm sorry to bang on about it, but changing the way we represent women, because as long as we continue to present women as being only here for display purposes, let's say, then as soon as they start behaving, you know, annoyingly like human beings and doing all the things that human beings might be interested in, it's this constant threat.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely back-ended experience in that by the time you receive the terrible tweet, there is so much going on in society that kind of produces that man, occasionally woman, but, you know, let's face it, usually men. I mean, I definitely modify myself now. I've just had too many dreadful days over the past. I think I joined Twitter in 98 or something, in 2008. I've had so many sort of dreadful days that I, exactly as you say, I kind of pick my battles. I think, do I feel strongly enough about this to really dig in and shout? And actually, can I be asked? Which I think, in a way, is indirectly silencing.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And loads of women are doing this all the time. When I was getting the threats and I was being very sort of public about it and refusing to back down, I got loads of emails from women saying, you know, thank you so much for not backing down. This happened to me. And I logged off, I closed down my account, no one would help me. I think loads of women have just quietly just sort of gone off.
I think if there is any positivity to be drawn from the sort of awful trolling, I do think it's made it nigh on impossible for people to continue to insist sexism doesn't exist. It's there in black and white.
Oh, they try though.
Oh, they try all the time. Of course they try all the time. But when, you know, it's that old adage about the comments prove the point completely. Whenever you talk about misogyny, and that's certainly true of Twitter, whenever I've said anything about Page 3, or when I was quite vocal about Dapper Laughs, the comedian, and so on, just the responses, just retweeting the responses or showing people the responses absolutely proves that there's a grave problem. And I suppose that's been the success of things like Everyday Sexism, where they've sort of turned that on its head. Things like Everyday Sexism, is that an example for you of where Twitter can really take sexism and misogyny and give it a more positive platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think, again, it's that women are being able to use this platform to talk about their lives, because the mainstream media doesn't give us that platform. You know, 78% of news stories are about men. So people weren't really talking about this before. And certainly I know that a lot of men have said to Laura, and have also said to me, that Everyday Sexism really opened their eyes to a whole experience that they just had no idea about, because no one was talking about it. And that's really what I think is so amazing about the internet for women, is that it enables us to say, fine, you're not going to talk about our lives, we'll talk about our lives, and we'll talk about them here. And as a result, now the mainstream media is talking about it. So I think the internet is an incredibly powerful tool for women.
Is there an argument? Catelyn did an interview last week with Lauren where she was saying, you know, the very nature of Twitter, the very structure of Twitter is a very male environment, in that there's less opportunity for nuance, there's less opportunity for nuanced emotion. You have those 140 characters, and her belief is that actually women need to be coding, women need to be creating their own environment to allow that space. Is that something that you would agree with?
That's a very interesting idea. I mean, I think certainly women do need to be coding to create their own environment. I think most of the internet has been built by men for men to suit the male experience. I don't know about the 140 character thing being particularly male. I mean, you could definitely make that argument. But on the other hand, I've had some really great conversations on Twitter.
Sure.
So I don't know.
And I mean, I don't 100% agree with Caitlin, much as I agree with so much she says. I don't particularly agree with Caitlin, just because I think men and women do have to coexist, and the internet by its very nature is going to be short and snappy, and actually at least those tiny tweets make people digest viewpoints in a wide variety of viewpoints in a more sort of digestible manner, I suppose. Do you see a bigger forum for yourself? So obviously the women's room has been a positive force for change and everyday sexism and so on. But do you see things happening elsewhere on the internet that are really empowering women in the way they communicate?
That's a really mean question. God, I'm sure there are. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. Can we come back to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let me put it another way. In terms of your experience online, it doesn't begin and end with Twitter. That's kind of, how we live our day and make a cup of tea and a slice of toast and we look at Twitter. But what else can women be doing away from that sort of easy online experience to create change?
What else can they be doing online?
Yeah.
Well, they can be blogging. That's an amazing thing to be able to do. And I think that it's incredibly easy to set up a blog and just start writing about your experiences and things that you see and things that you think, and joining in conversations with people. Obviously, there's petition platforms, which I just think are absolutely amazing. I mean, I think that the online petitions have really been one of the most exciting things to happen to democracy for a very long time. And I know people are quite sort of sceptical about them and a bit dismissive. There's this idea of it being clicktivism. But I just find that a really odd attitude. This is something that it's somehow like their very success makes them a bad thing. The fact that people are being interested in issues and wanting to get involved.
Why? Because
is
it's
a bad
noise
thing.
and
Too many people are getting involved in democracy now, therefore it's bad. That's a very odd attitude to take. And also, the offline activism is still going on. The amazing thing about online activism is that it enables you to reach a much wider number of people. And also I think the thing that people forget about the difference between an online and an offline petition is that an offline petition is a load of names on a piece of paper, whereas an online petition is a database.
Yes.
Which means that you can contact people and say, come along to this protest here, please, send an email to your MP there. And you can get people to do all these things, and it's a much more innovative, exciting and I think powerful way of being able to affect change.
You can also, I think it's quite powerful that you can see those names. You can log on and you can add your name and you see rafts and rafts of women like you, men with a similar sensibility, signing up to something. And that feels quite powerful, that sort of collective effort that you don't necessarily see with a bit of A4 brought round on a clipboard. It
definitely does. I mean, I really felt that when I was campaigning against the Bank of England, that it just felt like there was this huge group of us. Whereas before, it would have been just me getting cross with the Bank of England and writing them a letter and them writing back saying they're there, dear, which is essentially what their first letter was. And that would have been it, really. But instead, we really felt like a group, and it was a really incredible feeling. And I think that a lot of online campaigners will recognise that feeling.
It's also, I suppose, I think when feminism became such a huge part of the online experience, and we have to bear in mind Twitter is who we follow, so for some people there is no sort of feminist discourse in their timeline, fine. But when it felt like a sort of real swell of thought about feminism online, there was lots of kind of calling out, you're the wrong kind of feminist, you don't agree with me. And I feel that's become a more accepting environment now, that you have lots of viewpoints within feminism going on constantly on Twitter, and those kind of contacts being forged.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. That does seem to have quietened down a bit. It seemed really bad last year, I think, and the year before a bit as well. But I don't really know what's happened, but it does seem to have quietened down, which I think is great. Maybe it's that as feminists, we've become more comfortable with the idea that we can campaign together on one thing and maybe not on another thing. And I guess maybe more confident in feminism's position in the world, that it can contain multitudes and it can contain diverse opinions without it having to be threatening. So yeah, I mean, I'm really pleased that happens. I mean, I'm not sure that was the only reason it was happening. I mean, I think it was much more simple. I think it was misogyny. I think feminists can be misogynistic. Of course we can. And for me, it seemed a very clear case of women attacking each other for the very few spots that we have, rather than looking at the wide world and seeing all the spots that men are occupying and trying to go for them, which is understandable. And it's sad when women do it, and it's even more sad when feminists do it. But I think we need to sort of not be too harsh on ourselves.
Women are used to being told, well, we can have a few of you up here. So there is a natural sort of lioness instinct, I suppose, to kind of get those coveted
And I think
spots.
it's sort of, jostling with each other in this tiny little space, so we end up turning on each other. And again, I know I sound ridiculously like a broken record, but again, I think that this is where representation comes into it, because the more you see women around, the more you realise that actually it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be that there's only one funny woman and there's only one intelligent woman and there's only one woman politician, that there can be as many women there as there are men.
Yes, well, I suppose that's the joy of the internet. It is not finite.
Yeah.
As many women as you can ram into infinity.
Yeah.
There's space for all of us. Well, thank you for taking your space and for highlighting all the women who've gone before us, who've made their space in the world. Thank you very much for talking to the pool, Caroline.
Thank you.